say the ocean never really forgets. It just keeps returning what you've buried beneath it. Every morning at dawn, Ethan Clarke jogged along the narrow strip of coastline behind the small Airbnb he had rented for the summer. He wasn't there for a vacation, not really. The ocean town in North Point Bay was quiet, nearly forgotten, and that's exactly what he needed. He was trying to disappear. The air smelled of salt and decay. The waves gnawed endlessly at the dark sand, and a cold fog always seemed to hover just above the tide line. But it was peaceful, predictable. Every morning, he passed the same things: a crooked wooden fence, a half-buried fishing boat, and an old, abandoned lifeguard chair, tilted at an angle, half-rotted, and ghostly white from years of sun and sea. It stood there like a skeleton against the morning light, a relic from a time when people still swam here, before the drownings, before the bay became a warning on local maps. Ethan always glanced at it, sometimes even nodded to it, like a silent ritual, until one morning it nodded back. It was early, maybe 5:20 a.m., when he noticed something strange. A small piece of paper was flapping against one of the chair's wooden legs, pinned by a rusted nail. He stopped. The beach was empty, the air completely still. Only the distant crash of waves filled the silence. He peeled the paper off. It was wet from the mist, but the handwriting was still legible. It said only 3 words: "You left her." Ethan stared at it for a long time, his breath catching the back of his throat. He looked around. No one, just the empty stretch of beach. He told himself it was probably a prank. Maybe some teenager had been watching him jog and thought it'd be funny to freak him out. He crumpled the note and kept running. But that night, lying awake in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The handwriting, sharp, deliberate, familiar. And those words: "You left her." 3 years earlier, Ethan had been engaged to a woman named Lila Monroe. They met at a lifeguard training camp on this very coast. She loved the ocean, said it felt like home. But one summer afternoon, during a storm warning, they'd gone swimming anyway. He went under first. Strong current, cold shock. When he came up, she was gone. They never found her body. The police said it was an accident, but Ethan always knew it wasn't just that. He'd left her after an argument, after shouting things he couldn't take back. She ran into the water, furious and crying, and he stood on the shore watching until it was too late. No one knew the full truth. Not his parents, not hers, not even the police. So when he saw that note, it felt like the ocean itself had finally spoken. The next morning, he swore he wouldn't stop. He'd just run past it, pretend it didn't exist. But he couldn't help himself. There was another note. This one read, "You didn't scream." His hands began to shake. The pen strokes were darker, angrier. The following day, you watched her go under. And the next, you still dream of her. He reported it to the local sheriff, Deputy Mallory, a thick-set man who looked permanently unimpressed. Mallory squinted at the paper, then at him. "Lifeguard chair, you say? Near Driftwood Beach." Ethan nodded. Mallory frowned. "There's no chair out there. That area has been cleared since 2010. I saw it this morning." Ethan said, "It's there." The deputy chuckled. "Son, I've lived here 40 years. That chair rotted away a decade ago. Locals burned what was left of it after the Monroe girl drowned." Ethan's heart stopped. He began, but Mallory waved him off. "Don't let the ocean mess with your head. It remembers more than it should." That night, he couldn't sleep. He left the house, flashlight in hand, barefoot on the sand. And there it was, the lifeguard chair, clear as day, standing tall and pale in the moonlight, every detail visible, even the rusty nail still holding the first note. The sea was completely calm, silent, like it was waiting. He took a step closer. The air felt charged, colder. Pinned to the back of the chair was another note, fluttering in the wind. This one wasn't written on paper. It was written on a piece of faded red fabric. the same color as the swimsuit Lila had worn that day, and in shaky letters it read, "I can't breathe." Ethan dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the sand, illuminating footprints, his footprints, circling the chair over and over, as if he'd been pacing around it for hours. But he hadn't. He'd just arrived. The next morning, there were no notes. He thought maybe he'd imagined it. Maybe the grief was twisting his mind, until sunset, when he looked out his window and saw the lifeguard chair. It was standing right there, in front of his rental house, facing his bedroom window. He froze. The tide was out. There was no way someone could have moved it up the beach that far. It was hundreds of meters away that morning. He turned on all the lights, closed the blinds, locked every door. But all night, he could hear it, the faint creaking of what's shifting outside, like something breathing, swaying, waiting. At 3:14 a.m., he looked through the blinds. The chair had moved closer. The next day, the local police came to check after Ethan reported a trespasser. There was no chair, no footprints, nothing disturbed in the sand. Deputy Mallory gave him a long, uneasy look. "Sir, are you sure you've been sleeping?" That night, Ethan set up his phone to record the window. He fell asleep around midnight. When he checked the footage in the morning, it was 5 hours of static. Until the very last minute, the camera flickered, and for a single frame, the image cleared. The lifeguard chair was directly outside the window, and sitting in it was a woman. Her hair hung wet across her face. Her arms were gray, swollen, the skin of her neck stretched and pale. Her eyes, empty, sunken. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at him. Ethan packed his bags that afternoon. He didn't even care about the refund. As he stepped outside, he froze. The lifeguard chair was gone again, but something white was sticking out from under his windshield wiper. He pulled it free. It was another note. The handwriting was different now. Softer, slower, almost like hers. "You finally saw me." That night, neighbors reported strange sounds coming from the beach. Screaming, splashing, something like laughter. When police arrived, they found no sign of Ethan Clarke. But the next morning, joggers reported something new. The lifeguard chair was back, perfectly upright, facing the sea, and sitting in it was a man. His skin bloated and blue, his eyes wide open, staring toward the water as if waiting for someone to come out. Pinned to the chair was a single note. "Now you'll never leave her." The shack was small. Weathered wood, salt-stained siding, and a narrow porch overlooking the black sands of the northern coast. For Samantha Reed, a travel writer and novelist, it was perfect. She had come to escape, to finally finish her novel, far away from the endless buzzing notifications of city life. The rental was sparsely furnished, a small bed in the corner, a worn kitchen table, a kitchenette with chip paint, and a desk by the window. She unpacked her laptop, notebooks, and pens, then stretched out into silence. The ocean whispered in the distance, the fog rolling in low, cold and thick. The shack was isolated, far enough from the nearest town to feel like a retreat, close enough to civilization that help wasn't impossible, but almost perfect. On her second morning, Samantha decided to tidy the desk before beginning her work. Sliding open the single drawer, she found a small leather-bound logbook. The cover was worn, salt-stained, and the pages were yellow with age. Curious, she opened it. Inside, previous renters had left notes. Some casual, some poetic, some ominous. A man named Henry wrote about morning fog and seagulls. Another couple left a crude sketch of the shack. One note warned about the tide coming in faster than expected. The last entry stopped her cold. It was dated yesterday, and it was written in her handwriting. The words describe her morning exactly. "I woke to the fog curling along the beach. I unpacked my laptop, placed it on the desk, and poured coffee into a chip mug. I stared out the window at the waves as I opened my notebooks. I felt uneasy. Samantha laughed nervously. Impossible. She hadn't written anything yet. She reread the entry. Line by line, it described her movements, her thoughts, her coffee, the exact page she had turned in her notebook. By the second paragraph, her laughter had died. She paused to stretch, feeling a sudden chill. Something about the wind felt wrong. She didn't know why. The room was too quiet, too still. She froze. That was exactly how she felt. She tried to dismiss it. Writers often let imagination blur reality. She drank her coffee, tried to focus on her story. But as the hours passed, the shack began to feel oppressive. The fog outside thickened unnaturally, obscuring the shoreline entirely. Shadows from the desk lamp stretched long across the floor, twisting and writhing like living things. She returned to the logbook. She looks at the waves again. Something moves in the mist. She shakes her head. No, impossible. She writes her thoughts in the notebook, afraid her memory will fail her. Samantha's hands were shaking now. She didn't remember writing any of it. The last paragraph of the logbook was written in jagged, angry strokes. She glances behind her. The room feels colder. Shadows shift where no light should fall. The air tightens. She hears the faintest whisper, almost too soft to notice. When you read this, he'll already be behind you. Samantha dropped the book. Her heart slammed against her chest. She glanced toward the window. The fog pressed against the glass like a living wall. Then she heard it. The floorboard behind her creaking softly, slowly, one after another. Her breath hitched. By sunset, Samantha hadn't moved from her chair. She barricaded the door with a desk. Every shadow now seemed too sharp, too deliberate. The sound of waves outside no longer calmed her. They sounded distant, muted, almost forced. The whispers returned. Low, subtle, untraceable. At first, she thought it was the wind brushing against the shack's cracked siding. But then she heard it more clearly. Breathing, soft, uneven, deliberate, coming from the corner of the room behind her. She told herself it was imagination, stress, exhaustion. The next morning, sunlight cut through the fog, weak and gray. Samantha forced herself to inspect the shack. The desk had shifted. The chair was no longer under the desk. The logbook lay open, as if someone had placed it carefully in the center of the table. A new entry had appeared at the bottom of the page. She hadn't written it. She stands now, trembling, realizing the room is not empty. He has been here all along. The shack listens. The walls remember everything. Do not turn. Do not look behind you. When she read this, he is closer than ever. Samantha's blood ran cold. She bolted to the door. It was locked. Not from the inside. The lock was jammed. She tried windows. All sealed. Something moved upstairs. The shack had no second floor. Hours passed like minutes. The shack groaned. Shadows shifted unnaturally, stretching across the walls. Samantha could hear footsteps circling the room, soft at first, then louder, deliberate. She hid in the corner, trembling. Her notebook, open beside her, contained a new entry in her handwriting. He is here. He watches. He is always here. I cannot write, cannot breathe, cannot think. He will not leave. Do not read this. Do not look. If you do, it is too late. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the beach entirely. The ocean, normally calming, now sounded jagged, crashing in irregular, unnatural bursts. By midnight, Samantha's mind had fractured. She could no longer tell if she was moving, breathing, or even awake. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper felt like him. The entity that had already been behind her. The shack itself seemed alive. The walls pulsed. The floorboard shifted. The fog outside now pressed against the window like a hand, cold and firm. She grabbed the logbook, desperate to make sense, and saw one final entry, written freshly in ink that glistened wet and black. Welcome. You were expected. When you read this, he is behind you, always behind you. The shack keeps its promises. She didn't look up. She couldn't. A shadow fell across her shoulder. And then nothing. When the caretaker arrived the next morning to collect the rent and inspect the property, the shack was empty. No sign of Samantha. Her luggage remained neatly packed, the logbook open on the desk. All the pages, previously yellowed with age, were now filled with her handwriting, describing the events of that night in meticulous, panicked detail, ending with the same final sentence. When you read this, he'll already be behind you. No one has seen Samantha since. Locals report that sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and the waves roar unnaturally, the shack seems to move slightly closer to water, as if waiting for the next writer, the next reader, the next victim. And the logbook? It waits on the desk. Always open, always ready.
Thank you for watching. Kindly like, share, comment, and subscribe.